Maya's house always had this picture-perfect vibe. The dim lighting, the soft music playing in the background, and that faint smell of roses mixed with expensive candles. It all felt warm and inviting. Yet, there was something oddly artificial about it, like it was all set up for a scene in a movie. Tonight wasn't my idea to come here, though. It was Charlotte's. Earlier, she'd been standing in front of the mirror, adjusting her earrings, when she said, "Come on, Ethan. You've been working non-stop. You need this. We need this." She looked incredible, as always. That silky green dress clung to her figure in all the right ways, and her hair cascaded down her back like it had been styled by some Hollywood expert. Her makeup was flawless, just enough to make sure she looked effortlessly stunning. Of course, I noticed. I'd have to be blind not to. But somehow, between the endless work emails and the mental fog of exhaustion, the words to tell her just didn't come out. I figured she already knew how beautiful she looked. How could she not? As we stepped into the party, I tugged at my collar and put on a smile, though it felt more like armor than an expression. The music hummed at just the right volume, not loud enough to be overbearing but enough to encourage conversation. Maya greeted us almost immediately with her signature enthusiasm, the kind that was always so over the top it made you wonder if it was genuine or just a way to fill the space. "Hey, you made it!" she exclaimed, pulling Charlotte into a tight hug. Then she turned to me. "And Ethan, good to see you." Before I could respond, Connor appeared at my side, slapping me on the back with way too much enthusiasm. "How's the grind, man? Still married to the job?" he asked, grinning as if he thought he was funny. But I caught the way his eyes lingered on Charlotte just a fraction too long, and it set something on edge in me. "More like married to stress," I muttered, trying to keep my tone light while forcing a chuckle. Charlotte had already drifted off, laughing and blending seamlessly into the lively conversations around her. She had this natural energy that could light up a room, and tonight was no exception. Meanwhile, I was stuck, trying to wade through meaningless small talk that I didn't care about. Connor leaned in again, lowering his voice this time. "You good?" he asked, his tone making it clear he didn't quite believe my earlier answer. "Yeah," I replied quickly, brushing him off. But deep down, I wasn't fine. Things between Charlotte and me had been off for a while now. Still, I wasn't about to start unpacking all that here, of all places. I tried to focus on the noise and the crowd, but my eyes kept finding Charlotte. She looked so at ease, laughing with Maya and a small group of others. She belonged here in a way I didn't. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just another party. But then Logan showed up. I'd only met Logan a couple of times before, but that was enough to know the type of guy he was. He had this air about him, an almost overwhelming confidence that made you feel small without him even trying. Everything about him, from his perfect smile to the way he carried himself, was too smooth, too polished. "Hey, Charlotte, show me how to dance," Logan said, his voice cutting through the hum of the party like a knife. I froze, gripping my drink a little too tightly as Charlotte laughed. She tilted her head, giving that soft, inviting gesture she always had. "Sure," she said without even glancing my way. My chest tightened as I watched them head to the dance floor. Logan's hand slid around her waist in a way that looked far too natural, like it belonged there. Connor, still hovering nearby, leaned in again.
"Relax, man.
It's just a dance," he said, his tone trying to sound casual but only adding to my irritation. I glanced at him but didn't say anything. Pretending not to care was easier than admitting how much it bothered me. But it did bother me. Charlotte and Logan moved together like they'd been dancing forever. Their rhythm was effortless, seamless. Then Logan leaned in close, whispering something in her ear, and she threw her head back laughing, really laughing. Not the polite kind of laugh, but the kind that made her eyes sparkle. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't seen from her in months. I couldn't take it anymore. My heart was pounding as I crossed the room, trying my best to act casual despite the storm raging inside me. "Hey, Charlotte," I said, forcing my voice to stay even. "Care to dance with your husband?" She glanced at me, her smile playful and amused, like she knew exactly what she was doing. Later, "Babe," she said lightly, "I'm showing Logan some moves." It wasn't just the words, it was the way she said them, like I was an afterthought. I stood there for a moment, trying to keep my face neutral, while Logan gave me that smug grin that guys like him always seem to have on standby. Turning away, I headed for the bar, my chest tightening with every step. Connor followed me, his presence both a strange comfort and an annoyance. "You all right?" he asked, his voice softer now, but I could still hear the edge of curiosity. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, though we both knew I wasn't. My eyes drifted back to the dance floor, where Charlotte was moving with a kind of freedom I hadn't seen in ages. She looked like someone else entirely. Logan's hand slipped lower on her back, and something inside me cracked. As I tried to collect myself, Lily, one of Maya's friends, approached. Her expression was soft, almost pitying, as if she could sense exactly what I was feeling. "She's not thinking straight," Lily murmured, her voice soft but steady. "You know how she gets when she feels ignored." I didn't respond. What could I say? She wasn't wrong. But hearing it out loud from someone else hit harder than I expected. Lily gave my arm a brief squeeze before disappearing back into the crowd. "Just don't do anything stupid, okay?" she added over her shoulder. I stood there, the ice in my whiskey rattling as I swirled the last of it around the glass, trying to piece together everything that had just happened. It wasn't just the dance that had gotten under my skin. It was what it represented. This wasn't playful, harmless flirting. It was deeper than that. It was dangerous. Logan leaned in again, whispering something in Charlotte's ear, and she gave him this slow, deliberate smile that made my stomach twist. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just about her feeling neglected or having an off night. Something between us had shifted, and it wasn't going back to how it used to be. I placed my empty glass on the bar, a cold, grim resolve settling over me. If this was the game she wanted to play, then fine, I'd play too. The morning after the party, the house was uncomfortably quiet, like the silence had weight to it. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, casting everything in an ironic calm. Charlotte lay next to me, scrolling through her phone, a faint smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I couldn't see what she was looking at, but I didn't need to. I knew. I could feel it. Logan. Her body language told me everything I needed to know. Her shoulders tensed and relaxed, like she was reading something that made her happy, but that she didn't want to share. I rolled over, staring up at the ceiling while the events of last night replayed on a loop in my mind. It wasn't just the dance or even the smile. It was the way she had looked, alive in a way she hadn't in months. I tried telling myself it was just the alcohol, the atmosphere of the party, but then her phone buzzed again. I glanced over in time to see the flicker of excitement in her eyes before she quickly locked the screen. "Who's that?" I asked, keeping my voice as casual as I could. "Grace," she replied, too quickly, her smile tight and unnatural. I didn't push her, not yet. I tucked the moment away, like a piece of a puzzle I wasn't ready to finish. The rest of the day dragged by in a haze of empty conversations and routine tasks, but Charlotte wasn't really there. She floated around the house like a ghost, physically present but mentally miles away. Her eyes kept darting to her phone, hoping for something. A message, a notification, anything. That evening, we ended up on the couch, pretending to watch a movie. The TV was just background noise. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it away under the guise of adjusting a cushion. Her phone sat on the armrest, screen face down, but the faint vibration of incoming messages was impossible to ignore. She caught me glancing at it and quickly turned off the vibration, offering me a blank expression. "Everything okay?" I asked, focusing on the TV to avoid her eyes. "Yeah, just tired," she mumbled, shifting her position. I could tell she was lying. Her voice was all wrong, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. A few minutes later, she stood up, claiming she needed something from the kitchen. I waited until her footsteps faded, then grabbed her phone. It was locked, of course, but the notifications told me enough. "Had a great time last night. When can we meet again? You're even better than I imagined." My stomach twisted into a knot. I put the phone back exactly how it had been, forcing myself to stay calm. This wasn't just harmless fun anymore. This was something else. Something worse. When she came back, she gave me a small, forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. I pretended not to notice, but inside, I was falling apart. The next morning, I left for work, but I couldn't focus. The messages I'd seen were all I could think about. By the time I got home, I'd made up my mind. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than just suspicion. I needed proof. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention. Charlotte started leaving the house more often, always with vague excuses that didn't quite add up. Her smiles felt forced, strained, and when she was home, she was glued to her phone, texting constantly, her fingers moving like she couldn't get the words out fast enough. It was like watching someone I didn't know. One evening, as I sat pretending to read, I heard her laugh from the other room. It was soft and light, the kind of laugh I hadn't heard from her in ages. It hit me harder than I expected. She wasn't laughing with me anymore. It didn't take long for her to slip up. Late one night, I heard her talking on the phone, her voice low and intimate, while she thought I was asleep. The next morning, while she was in the shower, I grabbed her phone again. This time, the messages were clear as day. How about coffee tomorrow? I'd love to see you again, Charlotte. I don't know, Logan. Come on, it'll be fun. Okay, but just coffee. I could almost hear her convincing herself. It's just coffee. Just a conversation. It doesn't mean anything. But I knew better. The next day, Charlotte told me she was running errands. I already knew where she was going. I followed her, keeping my distance. Sure enough, she walked into a small cafe downtown, and there he was, sitting in the corner, waiting for her. They sat together for what felt like an eternity, talking and laughing like old friends with nothing to hide. I couldn't hear the words they exchanged, but I didn't need to. It was the way Charlotte leaned into him, the way her hand casually brushed against his. They weren't just two people having coffee, they were two people on the edge of something that could destroy everything. When she came home later, her face was flushed, her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. She tried to act like everything was normal, but I saw the guilt in the way she moved. She hugged me, kissed my cheek, and said, "I missed you today." The lie slid out so effortlessly that it made my skin crawl. In that moment, it hit me. This wasn't just a rough patch or some misunderstanding. Something between us had shifted, and there was no coming back from it. I decided not to confront her. Not yet. I needed more than just the weight of suspicion. I needed concrete proof, and when the moment came, I would be ready. It started subtly, almost imperceptibly at first, small changes I couldn't explain but couldn't ignore. Charlotte started making excuses to leave the house more often. Her reasons were vague, her explanations thin. She began working late more frequently, coming home with an air of distraction, her mind clearly elsewhere. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just stress or work piling up, but deep down I knew better. Then she mentioned another event, this one with Logan. "He's invited me to a pop-up art gallery downtown," she said casually, as though it were no big deal. But her eyes betrayed her. They lit up with a spark she couldn't quite suppress, and the faint smile tugging at her lips told me everything. "You're seeing Logan again?" I asked, trying to sound neutral, though I could feel my pulse quicken. "It's not a date, Ethan," she snapped, her voice sharp and defensive. "It's just some friends. He invited me, and I thought it'd be fun." "You didn't mention this before?" I pressed, my voice steady but tinged with suspicion. "I didn't think I had to," she shot back, her words cutting deep. "Do I need your permission to go out now?" Her tone stung, slicing through the conversation like a blade. I stood there, caught between anger and resignation, knowing there was no point in arguing. She'd already made up her mind. Later that night, Charlotte rushed into the bedroom, pulling clothes from the closet and getting ready with more care than I'd seen her put in for months. The air filled with the scent of her perfume, the same one that used to drive me crazy but now only made my stomach churn. "When will you be back?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Late," she said curtly, not bothering to look up. Don't wait up. And just like that, she was gone, leaving me standing there in the silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. It wasn't the first time she'd gone out late, but tonight felt different. I tried to distract myself. TV, emails, anything to pull my mind away, but it didn't work. My thoughts kept circling back to her and Logan. I imagined them together, laughing, her hand brushing his. It all felt so effortless for them, so natural, in a way it hadn't been for us in a long time. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. Grabbing my phone, I scrolled through my contacts and paused when I saw Maya's name. For a moment, I hesitated. Should I drag her into this? But before I could talk myself out of it, I pressed dial. Ethan? Maya's voice was surprised. Everything okay? Not really, I admitted, running a hand through my hair. Listen, I know Charlotte went to that art event with Logan. Do you know where it is? I tried to keep my voice steady, but the desperation bled through. There was a long pause, and for a second I thought she might hang up. Then she sighed. It's at the gallery on 6th and Vine, she said reluctantly. Ethan, I don't think this is a good idea. I just need to see for myself, I muttered, cutting her off. She didn't argue. The drive downtown felt endless. Every red light, every slow car stretched time, tightening the knot of anxiety in my chest. When I finally parked in front of the gallery, I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I told myself I was overreacting, that I'd walk in and find them in a group, chatting innocently. But deep down, I knew better. Stepping inside, the soft hum of jazz music and the faint clink of wine glasses filled the air. And there she was, bathed in the warm glow of the gallery lights, standing close to Logan. Too close. They weren't holding hands, but they didn't need to be. Their body language said everything. Charlotte's face lit up as she laughed at something Logan said, the sound hitting me like a punch to the gut. For a moment, I froze. I'd pictured this scene 1,000 times. Storming in, demanding answers, making a scene. But now that I was here, all I felt was numb. I spotted Maya standing off to the side, a wine glass in her hand, her gaze darting between Charlotte and me. Her expression was unreadable, but the pity in her eyes was unmistakable. I hated her for it. Maya, I said quietly as I approached her, my voice tight and low. What the hell is going on? She looked up at me, her face full of hesitation, as if deciding whether to lie or tell the truth. I tried to tell her this wasn't a good idea, Maya murmured, her voice low but steady. Why didn't you stop her? I demanded, my voice rising with frustration. Maya sighed, shaking her head. She's not someone you can stop, Ethan. You know that. I clenched my fists, fighting to keep my anger in check. Every fiber of me wanted to march over to Charlotte, pull her away from Logan, and demand an explanation. But deep down, I already knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever was happening between them had already crossed a line. She's not just flirting, is she? I whispered, almost too afraid to hear the answer. Maya's expression softened. Her eyes filled with a mix of pity and regret. Slowly, she shook her head. She didn't need to say more. It confirmed what I had felt in my gut all along. I stood there, watching Charlotte laugh and talk with another man, feeling like a stranger in my own life. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. This wasn't the future I had envisioned when we started our lives together. For the first time in years, I felt utterly lost, and I knew that no matter what happened next, things between us would never be the same. The next party came around faster than I expected. This time, though, I wasn't going to sit on the sidelines watching Charlotte play her game with Logan. If she thought I would just stand by while she flaunted her flirtations, she was in for a surprise. I had a plan. It wasn't complicated, but it was calculated. If Charlotte wanted attention, she was about to find out what it felt like to crave it and not get it. As we arrived, Maya greeted us with her usual warmth, ushering us inside with promises of good drinks and great company. I nodded politely, but my focus wasn't on her or the crowd. My eyes scanned the room, searching for one person. Sophia. I'd only met her briefly before, but she'd stuck in my mind. Tall, blonde, and exuding effortless confidence. She didn't just blend into the background like most people. Sophia stood out, and tonight that's exactly what I needed. I spotted her near the bar, dressed in a sleek black dress that clung to her frame perfectly. She held a glass of champagne and radiated a kind of self-assurance that turned heads. She looked like she belonged in control of the room. Leaning toward Charlotte, I spoke just loud enough for her to hear. "I'm going to grab a drink," I said casually. She barely looked at me, her attention already drifting toward Logan. Perfect. I approached Sophia, taking a second to collect my thoughts. "Champagne suits you," I said with an easy smile. She glanced at me, her eyes narrowing slightly in curiosity. Her lips curled into a sly smile. "And what suits you?" she asked, her tone playful. I chuckled, feeling a thrill I hadn't felt in years. "I guess we'll find out," I replied smoothly. The conversation flowed naturally from there. Sophia was sharp, witty, and engaging in a way that felt refreshing. We exchanged jokes, laughed, and before long, I noticed eyes from across the room locking onto us. Charlotte was watching. Her smile faltered, just slightly, but enough for me to catch it. She stood next to Logan, but her focus was entirely on me. I could see the tightness in her jaw, the flicker of something almost like resentment in her eyes. She wasn't used to this. She wasn't used to being the one left wondering. Good. Let her wonder. I turned my attention back to Sophia, leaning in slightly as I let my hand brush against her arm. We laughed at something trivial, but the moment felt electric. I could feel Charlotte's gaze burning into the back of my neck. A few minutes later, I glanced toward her again. She had leaned into Logan now, her hand resting on his arm in a way that was almost too familiar. The smile she gave him was forced, the kind of smile that was trying too hard. She was scrambling to regain her footing, to reclaim the attention she had so effortlessly given away. But it wasn't working. Logan noticed it too. His gaze flickered between Charlotte and me, intrigued by the unspoken tension. He wasn't oblivious. He could sense that this was more than just casual flirtation. Meanwhile, Sophia soaked up my attention, her laughter genuine and light. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I had control. I wasn't on the sidelines anymore. I was in the middle of the game, pulling the strings. I saw Charlotte whisper something to Logan, her body language shifting as she tried harder to draw him in. She leaned closer, laughed louder at his jokes, but it all felt forced. Logan seemed entertained by her effort, but he wasn't fully engaged. He was too busy watching the silent battle unfold. As the night wore on, Charlotte's frustration became palpable. She was working overtime to win Logan's attention, but the cracks in her confidence were beginning to show. She leaned too close, laughed too loudly, and smiled too much. It wasn't natural anymore, it was desperate. Meanwhile, I kept my pace steady with Sophia, our conversation flowing effortlessly. I wasn't rushing, and I wasn't forcing anything. I wanted Charlotte to see what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. The tension between us was thick, almost suffocating. It felt like we were opponents in a battle, each silently trying to prove something to the other. We didn't need words to exchange blows. Our actions said enough. The strange dynamic between us was impossible to ignore. Logan, always the observer, seemed to relish the chaos unfolding between Charlotte and me. He played along just enough to keep her hooked but stayed distant enough to watch her unravel, as if he were enjoying a front-row seat to the spectacle. Every so often, he glanced my way with that smug smirk, as though he was fully aware of the game I was playing. It was maddening, but it was also satisfying. For once, I wasn't the one chasing her. It was Charlotte who seemed insecure now, wondering if she had pushed things too far. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one trying to fix it. At some point, Charlotte excused herself, pulling Logan toward a quieter corner of the room. I watched them go, a surge of satisfaction mixing with something darker, a heaviness in my chest that I couldn't quite place. Sophia, still by my side, touched my arm lightly. "You seem distracted," she said, her tone playful. "Just taking it all in?" I replied, my eyes still fixed in the direction Charlotte and Logan had disappeared. Sophia followed my gaze, her expression sharpening as she picked up on the tension. You and your wife, huh? Interesting dynamic, she said, her voice calm but curious. You could say that, I muttered, taking a sip of my drink. She smiled knowingly but didn't press further. Sophia was sharp enough to see there was more to the story than I was letting on, and smart enough not to push. The evening wore on, but I couldn't stop watching Charlotte. She was leaning closer to Logan now, laughing at something he said with a casual ease that made my blood boil. Her hand rested on his arm, just a little too familiar. But it wasn't just Logan she was after, it was me. She wanted my attention, and she wanted it badly. And for the first time I wasn't giving it to her. Felt like power. No, it felt incredible. As the night wound down, the shift in the air between us was undeniable. The balance had changed. Charlotte felt it too. She knew the game wasn't over, but for now I held the upper hand. And I wasn't about to let it go. The next day, Maya's call wasn't a surprise, but her words hit harder than I expected. Ethan, she said, her voice hesitant. I thought you should know. Charlotte's having dinner with Logan tonight. Just the two of them. Her words landed like a punch to the gut. My chest tightened, and I froze, gripping the phone as my mind raced. That French place on 9th Street? I asked, my voice tight. Yeah, Maya replied, guilt evident in her tone. I thought you should hear it from me. I thanked her, my voice distant, before ending the call. My thoughts spiraled. This wasn't just coffee anymore. It wasn't an art show or an excuse. It was a real date. The weight of betrayal pressed heavily on me. This was the moment I'd been dreading, the one I knew was coming. And I wasn't going to let it go. Not this time. When I arrived at the restaurant, I didn't rush inside. I stood on the sidewalk, staring through the large windows, trying to steady myself. Charlotte and Logan sat at a small, intimate table in the corner. They leaned toward each other, laughing freely. She looked so at ease, so relaxed. Felt like I was looking at a stranger. The woman across from Logan wasn't the Charlotte I knew. Finally, I stepped inside, my heart pounding as I made my way toward their table. The restaurant was quiet, dimly lit, the warm lighting casting shadows that only deepened the ache in my chest. They didn't notice me at first. Charlotte was too busy laughing, her hand lightly resting on Logan's, her body angled toward him. I stopped a few feet away, watching the woman I loved slip further from me with each second that passed. Then she looked up. Her smile faltered instantly, replaced by shock and guilt. It was all over her face. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. I didn't stop walking. I didn't yell. I didn't make a scene. I just kept moving, brushing past her like she was just another stranger in the room. Ethan, wait, she called after me, her voice trembling. I didn't turn back. I could feel the weight of every stare in the restaurant, but I didn't care. Whatever Charlotte wanted to say, whatever excuse she had, it didn't matter anymore. Not to me. I wasn't there to create drama. I was there for clarity, and now I had all the answers I needed. Logan shifted in his seat, his discomfort evident as his eyes darted between Charlotte and me. He realized too late that he had inserted himself into something far messier than he had anticipated. Hey man, I didn't mean to, Logan started, raising his hands in a weak attempt to defuse the situation. I turned to him, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the tension. You didn't mean to what? Sit here with my wife? Be the reason she's lying to me? Charlotte stood abruptly, her eyes wide with panic. Ethan, please, let's talk about this. Talk about what? I snapped, my patience worn thin. How you've been sneaking around behind my back. How you thought I wouldn't notice. How you could just laugh it off like it didn't matter. Logan raised his hands higher, trying again to calm me. Look, I don't want to get in the middle of this. You're already in the middle of it, Logan. I shot back, my voice rising. You put yourself here the second you invited her to dinner. Charlotte stepped closer, desperation etched across her face. Ethan, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I cut her off, my tone sharper than ever. I've seen how you look at him, how you act when you're with him. Don't stand there and lie to me, Charlotte. Not now. Her face crumpled, and for the first time, I saw something real in her expression. Fear. Not fear of me, but fear of what she was losing. Ethan, please, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But it was too late. I turned on my heel and walked away, my chest tight with a mix of rage and sadness. Logan sat silently, not daring to move, his presence a painful reminder of how far Charlotte and I had fallen. I didn't look back. As I stepped out into the cold night air, the weight of betrayal pressed deeper into my chest. But amidst the anger and hurt, there was something else. Relief. I was done. When Charlotte came home that night, the silence between us was deafening. Her heels clicked softly on the floor as she entered, pausing in the doorway like she wasn't sure if she should come in. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of me. I knew this conversation was inevitable. There wouldn't be yelling or accusations. Just the truth, raw and undeniable, hanging in the air between us. Charlotte hesitated, the weight of her choices visible in the way her shoulders sagged. She finally moved to the couch and sat down across from me, her face pale and drawn, as if the gravity of her actions had finally sunk in. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I exhaled slowly, feeling a small release of the tension in my chest. Her apology unlocked something in me, but it wasn't enough to erase the pain. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. There were so many things to say, but the words felt too big, too raw to put into sentences. Finally, Charlotte broke the silence, her voice trembling. "I betrayed you, Ethan," she said, her words thick with guilt. "I never meant for it to go this far. It just happened, and I didn't know how to stop." Her confession hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just the words, it was the honesty behind them. There were no excuses, no attempts to justify what she'd done. Just the cold truth laid bare. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something we could brush aside. It was betrayal. "You could have told me," I said quietly, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You could have come to me when things started going wrong." Her eyes dropped to her hands, which twisted nervously in her lap. I thought maybe Logan could give me something I was missing," she admitted, her voice faltering. "But he didn't. It only made me realize how lost I really am." Her words hit me, but I didn't let them drown me. I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my drink and letting her confession settle in the space between us. It hurt, but it was necessary. We couldn't keep running from the truth. "I'm not innocent in this either," I admitted, the words coming slower than I expected. "I got caught up in everything: work, life. It got too easy to stop seeing you, to stop paying attention to what you needed." She wiped at her eyes, though no tears had fallen yet. "I know," she whispered, her voice fragile. We sat there for what felt like hours, the weight of everything that had happened filling the silence between us. There was no yelling, no accusations. Just the quiet understanding that we had both contributed to this moment, that neither of us was blameless. It was the hardest conversation we'd ever had, but it was also the most honest. The silence between us felt like a fragile space, a pause for both of us to grieve what we'd lost and to start piecing together what came next. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. We were two people sitting in the wreckage of what we'd built, trying to figure out if there was anything worth salvaging, or if it was time to walk away. Finally, Charlotte spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "I think we need space," she said, her words hanging in the air. "Time apart to figure out what we really want." I paused, letting the truth of her words settle in. As much as I hated to admit it, she was right. "I agree," I said slowly, my voice heavy with exhaustion. "There's no quick fix for this. It's too deep. We need time to heal, to figure out if there's anything left." She nodded, her expression tinged with sadness but also a quiet acceptance. I've been so caught up in trying to feel something again, trying to fix what I thought was missing, but all I did was destroy what we had. For the first time in a long while, I felt an odd sense of peace. Not because anything was fixed, it wasn't, but because there was clarity in the honesty. For once, there were no pretenses, no excuses, just the truth of where we stood and what we needed to do. "I need to focus on myself," I said, the words coming out more naturally than I expected. "I can't keep trying to hold everything together. I've been running on empty for too long. I need to find myself again, without all the noise." Charlotte's face softened, her eyes filled with understanding. "And I need to figure out who I am without us," she said quietly. "Without clinging to the idea of what we used to be." There were no grand promises, no hopeful speeches about reconciliation. We both knew there wouldn't be a quick fix, no illusions that everything would magically be okay. But there was something honest, even freeing, in that acceptance. We had stopped pretending. We talked for a while longer, but the conversation shifted to logistics. Who would stay where, how we'd handle telling friends and family. It was surreal, moving from the emotional weight of our situation to the practicalities of unraveling our lives together. But it felt like the natural progression of what had already been decided. When the conversation ended, there was no dramatic goodbye. We sat together in the silence for a little while longer. Eventually, Charlotte stood, gave me a small, sad smile, and walked to the bedroom. I stayed where I was, listening to the sound of her soft footsteps fade into the distance. The next morning, Charlotte packed a bag. There were no tearful gestures or heartfelt farewells. Just a quiet understanding between us that this was the beginning of something else. Something we both needed, even if it wasn't what we had hoped for. In the days that followed, I started focusing on myself for the first time in years. I went to the gym, took long walks with no destination in mind, and reconnected with friends I hadn't spoken to in what felt like a lifetime. It wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of the past would crash down on me, and I'd feel overwhelmed all over again. But little by little, I started to feel like myself again. Someone I hadn't been in a long time. Charlotte and I kept our distance. There were polite texts here and there, just enough to check in, but nothing more. We both understood that things would never be the same between us, and that was okay. It was strange to think of our lives moving in different directions, but there was a certain relief in it too. I never saw Logan again, and honestly, I didn't care to. He had been a painful reminder of everything I'd ignored for too long, a mirror reflecting the cracks in my marriage that I hadn't wanted to see. Charlotte, in her own way, seemed to learn something too, about herself, about what she needed, and about what she was willing to fight for. In the end, we both found what we had been searching for, but not in each other. We found it within ourselves. And as painful as the journey had been, I knew it was the one we needed to take. Life doesn't always give you the ending you want, but sometimes it gives you the one you need.